We've all heard the stats. 90% of AI pilots fail, 88% don't make it to production. And most leaders are losing credibility because they're not precise about what production means or what it takes to get there. And that naivete shows. You've seen this play out. Maybe you've even lived it. The demo earlier than last year was amazing. Leadership was excited. Hey, let's get this to production. It's said all around. 6 months later, there's still in progress, right? Still blocked, and you're losing credibility every time someone asks for a status update. Problem that nobody talks about is the massive gap between a prototype and production. And especially if you can't articulate what that gap looks like, you're going to struggle. When leaders can't speak precisely about what it takes to get to production, engineering teams stop taking them seriously. Here's what I see on most, if not all, teams. A leader says, let's get this to production, and the engineering team hears, I don't really know what I'm asking for, because production isn't just one thing, it's a spectrum. And where you land on that spectrum determines how hard this challenge is actually going to be. Let me break it down into 4 levels when we're talking about the spectrum. The first level is a shareable demo, getting something up on a quote unquote production server that's just a clickable prototype. It proves here's the vision, it's great for feedback. All that's required is a link and some hosting. And almost anyone with modern prototyping tools can do this quickly in a couple of minutes, basically. If the goal is simply to get something on a public server for feedback and early validation, this is great. And it's still, in some worlds, technically production. Level 2 is a working application, and that's what a lot of people normally mean, right? It actually works. There's a real back end. Users can create data. This isn't mock data. This can actually function like the end product is intended to. It's proving, again, still for user validation that this can work. And you do require now things like a database in the back end, basic error handling, some testing. You're going to want to have engineering at least support some basic operational monitoring of this, so if it totally breaks, you would know, right? If you're sharing this with users, you want to actually know if they can't actually see things working like they're supposed to. You're probably going to also want to build some error handling into the tool itself, right? So technical PMs can do this, and you can still do this with the current no-code vibe coding tools, but it is a lot more complex and it's going to take you longer to fight through some of the operational issues. Especially, they usually at the beginning take care of deploying everything to production for you, but they won't take care of integrating with any existing monitoring systems or systems you need to actually keep an eye on. Is the system working? Is it slowing down? How often is it throwing errors? Okay, let's talk about level 3. So now something is customer facing and it actually requires security. So that means if you have users creating accounts, passwords, maybe even entering payment information, now we're talking about a lot more requirements, not just around operational monitoring to make sure things are safe and not getting hacked, but also just around compliance. What are your organizational rules around what you are allowed to do with personally identifiable information, payment methods, etc. This is especially tricky if you work in one of the more highly regulated environments like fintech or health tech. There's going to be a lot more requirements of what you can and can't do with that data and what tools can touch it, even the development stage. When you're dealing with payment data or even personally identifiable information, now you're going to need a much higher degree of testing, robustness on security, and privacy compliance, right? Data protection. You're also going to want to be much more tightened up about the monitoring you're doing to be sure that there are no data leaks and legal exposure. This is where you really need to live if you're going to that MVP level. We talked last week about the different kinds of prototypes. If you're getting to a prototype where you want to prove that people will pay, that they will create an account and come back, now you're going to let into this level of production that you need. And then finally, let's talk about scalable systems. So this is really where enterprise struggles because a lot of these tools are built for very few users out of the gate. But if you actually really want something to be able to handle a scaled number of users, let's say over 1,000 users over a day, right out of the gate, because that's what your existing tools already have as an audience, you have a lot more technical hurdles to clear before putting this out there. You're looking for things before they break at scale. So you're going to need a lot more performance monitoring and dashboards that can help you understand when you get to a certain number of users, what starts to fall apart. You can do a lot more pre-testing and load testing ahead of time, but a lot of companies, they haven't done that before, aren't set up for doing that kind of testing and infrastructure at scale. Your infrastructure needs to be set up so that operations can easily add additional resources if they need to, if they get a spike in traffic or a spike in usage. So that scalable infrastructure needs to be in place. Here's the hard truth. What works for 100 users often breaks at 10,000. And fixing those bottlenecks usually isn't as quick and easy as throw more money or throw more resources at it unless you've thought through the scalability issues before getting it out there in the wild. This is where deep engineering expertise and judgment comes in. And this is where the no code tools start to fall apart. You need to decompose your system in a completely new way if you need it to scale. Why this matters for your credibility: when you tell engineering, let's just go to production without really specifying exactly what you mean, here's how this is hurting your credibility. Unless you already have a really clear understanding of a common language about production, if you say, let's just get it to prod without specifying what that means, it's really clear you don't understand their world and how much time and effort you have to put into supporting this, answering those phone calls in the middle of the night if something gets slow or goes down. You're showing a complete disregard in that case for what operations does, and they already a lot of the time feel like they're getting ignored and that their heroics barely get noticed. When things really stall is often because nobody aligned on what production level something is supposed to get to. If this is a brand new standalone feature that you just want to test for users, that's fine, but don't be telling them that it needs to be able to scale like the rest of your infrastructure. And that's where being precise really matters. And the very worst thing you could do is say you're going to be using these 5 coding tools that look like they work well enough as the bar for whether something is ready for production, and potentially even throwing non-technical users in the role of putting stuff to production for engineering to support and take care of without really addressing how that would work. And that absolutely is a trust killer across the board. If you take nothing else away from this video, I want you to remember it's not always your job to build to level 4. And that is when we get into engineering work. It is your job to keep these levels distinct in your head and know that they exist. It's not your job or the job of your PM team to build everything to level 4. That's engineering work. But it is your job to know that these levels exist and to know that they incur different cost profiles. You need to set realistic expectations and to be the leader who can say, we're aiming for this level of production support for this pilot and this level for when we actually want to scale it to 10,000 or 100,000 users. This precision is what earns respect with engineering. So one more thing to keep in mind is that production means that someone is on call when things break, and that painful process of an operations work overlooked, undervalued, but it's absolutely real, and the engineers will recognize this from day one. Do you? So if you want to become that leader who speaks AI in engineering's language and can actually get AI from prototype to the right level of production with the right trade-offs, that's what I teach. We're going to be diving into this in my free masterclass, How Product Leaders Are Staying Essential in the Age of AI. And I'd love for you to join me. Link is below in the comments, or also there's a link in my bio. See you soon.